All right, let's dive into one of history's biggest what-if moments. We're talking about Hannibal Barca, the military mastermind who brought the superpower of Rome to its knees and came this close to breaking it completely.
So where does a story like this even begin? Well, it starts with a promise made by a 9-year-old boy. Roman historians tell us his own father made him swear this oath of eternal hatred. Now, whether this is 100% true or just an awesome legend, it perfectly sets the stage. For Hannibal, this was never just a war between countries. It was personal.
So you gotta ask, how does one guy become the bogeyman for an entire republic? Well, to really get Hannibal, you first have to get the world he was born into. A world of humiliation for a city and a family that was absolutely burning for payback.
Yeah, Hannibal was literally born into the ashes of defeat. You see, his home city, Carthage, had just been smashed by Rome in a long, brutal war. And the price for losing was steep. Carthage lost its valuable islands and had to pay these crippling war debts to Rome. This defeat, this humiliation, it shaped everything about his childhood.
So Hannibal's dad, a guy named Hamilcar, he was smart. He knew he couldn't go head-to-head with Rome's navy, so he came up with this brilliant long game. He looked to Spain. He started conquering the peninsula piece by piece, not just for the land, but for its rich silver mines to fund a new war, and for its people to build a new army. Spain was going to be their new launch pad, aimed right at Rome.
Fast forward to 219 BC. Hannibal's now the one in charge, and he is ready to go. He just needed a trigger, right? A casus belli, as they say, an excuse to start the fight. He found it in a city called Saguntum. Now, Saguntum was friends with Rome, but it was deep inside Hannibal's territory, so he attacked it. It was a calculated move, a dare he knew Rome couldn't just ignore. And when Rome told him to back off, Carthage said no. The Second Punic War was on, just like he wanted.
Okay, so the war is on, and Hannibal, wow. He immediately pulls a move that is so completely out of left field, so audacious, that we're still talking about it over 2,000 years later.
So put yourself in his shoes for a second. Here's the puzzle. Rome's navy owned the Mediterranean. A seaborne invasion? That's just suicide. Their ships would find you and sink you long before you ever saw land. So how do you get your army into Italy?
He did the one thing nobody thought was possible. He decided to just walk. He marched his entire army, tens of thousands of men from all over, cavalry, and of course his famous war elephants, right over the freezing, treacherous Alps. To the Romans, this was pure insanity. No one would ever try that. Which is exactly why it worked. It was a total strategic shock.
So, after this insane trek through the Alps, Hannibal doesn't just rest. He starts racking up these incredible victories all over Italy. But one battle stands out as the absolute peak of his genius, a day that would go down in history as tactical perfection. We're talking about the Battle of Cannae.
By this point, the Romans they're fed up. They want to crush this guy once and for all. So they pull together the biggest army they have ever assembled. We're talking nearly 80,000 soldiers. Hannibal, he's got maybe 50,000. On paper, this should have been a slaughter. But for Hannibal, it became his finest hour.
His tactic, now legendary, is called the double envelopment. And it was just a masterclass in psychology. First, he put his weakest soldiers right in the middle and had them push forward in a bulge. It was an invitation the Romans couldn't resist. So the Romans, they take the bait and charge right into the center. Then, Hannibal's center pulls back on purpose, sucking the Roman army deeper and deeper into a U-shape. That's when his best troops, the African infantry on the sides, swing in like doors and slam into the Roman flanks. To top it all off, his cavalry circles around and attacks the Romans from behind. The trap was sprung.
And just like that, the Romans were trapped. They were packed in so tight they could barely even lift their swords. The result was, well, it was a slaughter, a methodical one. As many as 70,000 Roman soldiers killed or captured in one afternoon. It's literally one of the bloodiest single days in all of military history. The textbook definition of a perfect victory.
So after a beatdown like that, you'd think it was over, right? Game, set, match for Carthage. Rome was on the ropes, its armies destroyed. But Hannibal was about to learn a very hard lesson about his enemy's greatest weapon, its sheer, stubborn refusal to give up.
And this brings us to the million-dollar question, the one historians have argued about forever. With Rome's army in shambles, why didn't Hannibal just march on the city itself and end the whole thing? One of his own commanders supposedly said to him, "You know how to win a battle, Hannibal, but you have no idea how to use your victory."
But, it's never that simple, is it? Hannibal had some very good reasons not to march. For starters, he didn't have the big siege engines he'd need to break down Rome's massive walls. His army was also exhausted and way too small to surround the whole city. Plus, his grand plan wasn't actually to capture Rome, it was to prove Rome was beatable and get its allies to switch sides. A failed attack on the city would have ruined that whole plan.
And this is where Rome showed its true colors. They adapted. They came up with this brilliant and, for Hannibal, incredibly annoying strategy. They basically said, okay, we can't beat this guy in a fair fight, so we're not going to fight him. Instead of big battles, they just shadowed his army, hitting his supply lines, picking off stragglers, just slowly, patiently bleeding him dry. They took away his greatest strength by refusing to play his game.
So for years, Hannibal is basically stuck in Italy. He's winning battles, sure, but he's losing the war. Rome's strategy of just waiting him out was working. And then a new Roman general steps onto the scene. One who had watched Hannibal, studied him, and was about to turn the master's own tricks against him.
And you can really see how the whole war changed right here. Rome started out with these, let's say, over-eager commanders and rigid strategies, and Hannibal just ate them for lunch. But then they shifted to this war of attrition, which totally blunted Hannibal's genius. The whole dynamic of the war had flipped. This new guy, Scipio, he got it. He realized the key wasn't to fight Hannibal in Italy, it was to hit Carthage where it hurt. So first he goes and takes back Spain, cutting off Hannibal's money and his reinforcements. Then he does the one thing Hannibal probably never expected. He sails his army across the sea and invades Africa, bringing the war right to Carthage's home turf. After 15 long years in Italy, Hannibal had no choice but to go home and defend it.
So this all leads to the final showdown, the Battle of Zama. And in just the most perfect twist of fate, Scipio beats Hannibal by using Hannibal's own signature move against him. He pulled off a double envelopment, just like at Cannae. His cavalry smashed Hannibal's, then swung around to hit his army from behind. The student had officially become the master.
So, the war's over. Carthage loses. But Hannibal's story? Oh, it's not done yet. His final years tell you just as much about him and about how much Rome still feared him as any of his famous battles. Even after all that, Hannibal goes back and tries to fix things in Carthage, tackling corruption in their government. But his old rivals and constant pressure from Rome forced him out. He spent decades wandering the Mediterranean, a ghost haunting Rome, serving as a military advisor to anyone who would hire him. But Rome never forgot. They never stopped hunting him.
And finally, years later in 1803 BC, he's an old man, and Roman agents have him cornered. He knew there was no way out, so, true to his character, he took matters into his own hands and took poison rather than be captured. These were supposedly his last words, one last defiant jab at the enemy he had fought his entire life.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating question, right? Hannibal lost the war, his city was eventually wiped off the face of the earth, but did he really lose? His genius so completely terrified Rome that it forced them to evolve, to become better, smarter, and tougher. He basically taught them how to build the professional army that would go on to conquer the world. His tactics are still taught in military academies to this day. So yeah, Rome won the war, but you could argue it was their greatest enemy who showed them the way to empire.